In the cavernous hangar, its high steel arches echoing with the clatter of tools and the muffled chatter of mechanics, Ilara stood near the sleek silver fuselage of the machine she had poured her life into, her palms brushing across the smooth metal as if it were something alive, something breathing with her. The laughter came first as whispers. Low snickers passed between men who had dismissed her from the beginning, calling her dream nothing more than an eccentric fantasy, the idea of a silent aircraft as absurd as a fish flying across desert skies, and yet those whispers soon rose into louder jeers that bounced off the hangar walls like cruel ricochets. "She thinks she can defy physics," one mechanic muttered, tightening bolts on a more traditional jet in the corner, and another, smirking, tossed a greasy rag at the ground near her boots and said, "Why don't you try baking pies instead, sweetheart? It's less dangerous than killing yourself in that coffin?" Ilara didn't flinch, though her knuckles tightened on the clipboard she carried, for she had been enduring their doubt for months, perhaps years, and had long ago grown a skin harder than the alloys she had welded into her prototype. They hadn't been there when she had stayed up for 3 nights in a row, soldering delicate circuits and recalibrating thruster controls until her hands trembled. They hadn't heard the hum of the superconductive engine when it first whispered to life in the dead of night, a sound so pure and clean it seemed like the future itself was exhaling into the darkness. They only saw the girl with the stubborn eyes and oil-stained coveralls, standing in a place they still thought belonged only to them, the hangar of men and machines, where women were tolerated as clerks or secretaries, never as inventors, never as pilots. She breathed deeply, ignoring them, replaying in her mind the calculations that had been mocked in lectures and scrawled on napkins when inspiration struck during lonely evenings in cheap diners. Energy recapture from compressed plasma flows, vibration dampening along carbon-braided composites, acoustic shielding layers thinner than a sheet of paper but stronger than Kevlar. She remembered how her professors had smiled politely, the way adults smile at children spinning tales, and how investors had closed doors in her face, unwilling to fund what they called a dream with no future. Yet here she was in the hangar, her machine real, shimmering beneath the overhead lights with the poise of something not quite earthly. The men kept laughing, their voices trying to wrap her in a cage of ridicule, but her pulse was steady, her determination unshaken, because she knew something they did not. In just a few minutes she would show them, not with arguments or equations, but with silence, a silence so profound it would crush every laugh into a memory. She climbed the ladder into the cockpit, each step metallic, deliberate, like the tolling of a bell announcing the end of one era and the beginning of another, and as she slid into the pilot's seat, the scent of ozone and clean circuitry filled her lungs, sharper and more alive than the greasy smell of jet fuel that clung to everything else in the hangar. Fingers flying across the control panel, she initiated the startup sequence, and the cockpit responded with soft pulses of light, gauges glowing green one after another, the silent heart of her craft awakening without a single roar, without the scream of turbines. The laughter faltered, some of the men leaning closer, brows furrowing, as they realized they should have heard the familiar cough of engines by now but instead heard nothing at all, just the faint buzz of the fluorescent lamps above. Ilara's lips curved into the smallest smile, not of arrogance but of vindication, as she gripped the flight stick, adjusted the harness across her chest, and let the machine settle into its perfect stillness. The hangar doors, massive and rusted from years of salt air, began to rumble open, groaning on their hinges like old guardians unwilling to let go of secrets, and beyond them the morning sky stretched vast and pale, waiting. One of the mechanics finally shouted, "It'll never lift, you'll tear yourself apart." But even that voice was cracked, unsure, like a man doubting his own prediction. Ilara pressed her foot to the accelerator, released the brakes, and the craft slid forward on whisper-quiet wheels, gliding across the concrete as smooth as ice, so silent that the men instinctively stepped back as though confronted by a ghost. And in that suspended breath of time, with ridicule still clinging to the hangar walls, Ilara felt the future tilt in her favor, her machine and her dream aligned at last, ready to rise. The wheels rolled faster as Ilara guided the craft down the length of the runway, her eyes fixed on the distant line where concrete met sky, and the vibration she had feared never came, the frame holding steady, the silent drive pushing her forward with invisible power, smoother than anything she had ever flown. In simulations, and for a heartbeat she felt herself almost float before the lift even happened. The men were gathered just outside the hangar doors now, shielding their eyes from the glare of morning as they watched in disbelief, waiting for the inevitable sputter or explosion they had convinced themselves would come, yet the machine only whispered faster, cutting through the air without the thunderclap of turbines, without the bone-rattling roar of combustion. At 80 knots she pulled gently back on the stick, her pulse sinking with the craft, and the wheels broke free from the earth in a motion so seamless it felt less like a leap and more like a sigh, a transition as natural as a bird spreading its wings after a long hesitation. The ground fell away beneath her, the hangar shrinking into a toy box of metal and shadow, and for the first time she allowed herself to laugh, not at them, but at the absurdity of all the years she had spent believing she needed their approval, when the truth was above them all along. Silence wrapped around her like a living thing, the absence of engine noise making every sensation sharper, the hiss of air skimming across the fuselage, the faint creak of harness straps tightening against her chest, the soft clicking of instruments marking altitude and speed. It was not emptiness but presence, a soundless presence that filled the cockpit, reminding her that she was sitting inside a promise made real. Down below, she knew, the men were staring in slack-jawed wonder, hearing nothing but the wind, their laughter stripped from them, leaving behind only awe and something colder, fear perhaps of what this meant, of how wrong they had been. Ilara banked the craft gently to the left, the wings catching the light as if made of liquid silver, and the horizon tilted with her, revealing the stretch of coastline glittering like shards of glass, the ocean vast and unbroken beyond it. Her hands moved with instinct, adjusting trim, balancing thrust, the systems responding like extensions of her own body, and she realized that the years of solitude, the nights of failure, the cuts and burns and exhaustion, had been the forging of this bond, the shaping of a pilot who did not need noise or spectacle to prove flight was possible. A memory flickered unbidden, the night her father had found her at 12 years old, sitting in the garage with scraps of metal and a broken fan blade, insisting she could make it fly, and how he had laughed, not cruelly but with pity, as he told her some things were impossible. Yet even then, some small ember had whispered otherwise, and she had carried it all these years to this moment, now fanned into flame by the rush of wind through the cockpit glass. She climbed higher, piercing through a bank of thin clouds, and when she broke free above them the world stretched infinite and golden, sunlight painting the tops like fields of fire, and she inhaled deeply, tasting victory not as a sharp triumph but as a quiet, enduring truth. On the ground, cameras had already been pulled from pockets, hands scrambling to record what their eyes could barely believe, because silence itself was a revolution, and revolutions were dangerous to those who thrived on the certainty of the old ways. Ilara knew that when she landed, the laughter would never return in the same form, that something irreversible had happened here, not just for her, but for every dreamer watching from the shadows, waiting for proof that the impossible could be forced into reality. She leveled the craft, steady at 3,000 feet, testing responsiveness, pulling into a shallow dive then a climb, looping with a precision that would have rattled traditional engines but left hers smooth and seamless, the gauges unwavering. Every maneuver was a statement, every silent roll a declaration, and she imagined the reports that would be written, the words they would have to use, words like unprecedented, disruptive, impossible yet true. Her lips parted, whispering into the comms though no one was tuned to listen. "Do you hear me now?" The words vanished into the stillness, claimed by the very silence she had mastered, but she knew the answer was yes, louder than any turbine scream could ever be. She angled the nose slightly upward, pointing toward the endless sky, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe not just in proving them wrong, but in the greater possibility, that this craft was more than vindication, it was the seed of a future waiting to be claimed, and she would be the one to claim it, one silent flight at a time. The horizon stretched endless and clean before her, but Ilara knew this flight could not remain a simple demonstration forever. To prove the craft was not a fragile miracle but a working revolution. She had to push it further, had to risk what no simulator or ground test had dared simulate, and so she steadied her breathing, tightened her grip on the controls, and tilted the nose downward into a dive that made the sky around her blur into a tunnel of light and speed. The silent engine responded with flawless grace, no strain, no turbulence, the air itself folding around the craft as though reluctant to resist. Yet the altimeter spun rapidly and the coastline surged closer with alarming clarity, so she pulled back hard at the last second, the wings flexing, the frame groaning in a way she had not heard before. Not a failure but a warning that she was treading at the edge of what even her reinforced alloys could endure. A flash of adrenaline surged through her veins, but it was not fear, it was exhilaration, the kind that whispered of discovery just beyond the line of safety. She climbed again, steeper this time, testing the vertical thrust, the sky deepening from pale blue to a darker hue, and for a moment the cockpit trembled with thin air and cold pressure, and she felt herself becoming one with the silence, a creature cut loose from earthbound rules. Down below, the men who had mocked her were dots clustered by the hangar, some shading their eyes, others no doubt swearing she would never survive such maneuvers, but she knew she was already beyond their comprehension, flying not for them but for the proof that silence could master fury. Still, doubts lurked at the edge of her mind, She had never tested the craft for more than brief lifts and controlled circuits, and every additional second in the air multiplied the chances of discovering a flaw too late to fix. She ran a quick glance across the diagnostics flashing across her panel, the energy cells glowing steady, the superconductive coils stable, the acoustic shielding holding firm despite the strain of atmospheric drag, and relief washed over her until one gauge flickered, then steadied, a small red light winking like an omen in the corner of her vision. She ignored it at first, convincing herself it was a sensor quirk, but deep down she knew nothing on this machine was ornamental. Every reading was truth. She adjusted her course, banking over the sea, and the craft obeyed flawlessly, slicing across the sky in a curve so smooth it made her heart ache. Yet still that red light persisted, pulsing gently, warning her of something unspoken. She whispered to herself, words drowned in the hush, "Not now, not yet, just a little longer," and pushed the throttle forward, coaxing more speed from the drive, daring it to reveal weakness, daring it to betray her dream. The air tore past faster and faster, the coastline vanishing into streaks of color, the horizon trembling with acceleration, and the craft held together, every rivet and panel straining yet aligned, the silence deepening until it felt like she had slipped into a world where sound no longer existed. She thought of those below, the cameras in their hands, the jeers turned into stunned silence, the disbelief curdling into grudging awe, and she allowed herself one fierce smile, but behind it lingered the awareness that revolutions demanded sacrifices, and she might well be one if she pushed too far. The red light blinked again, steady this time, signaling stress in the shielding layers, and she felt the faintest vibration ripple through the frame, subtle but real, a whisper of danger beneath the triumph. She knew she should descend, land while she still could, prove enough and save the rest for another day, but her heart raged against caution, crying that to retreat now would hand them the excuse they craved, that her machine could only fly briefly, that it was fragile, that it was a trick of luck. She tightened her harness, adjusted her angle, and dove again, steeper than before, the ocean rising fast beneath her, blue surface glittering like a mirror waiting to shatter. The frame groaned louder, the cockpit shook, and for a moment she thought she had crossed into disaster, but at the very last instant she pulled out, the silent engine roaring invisibly within, steadying her climb with impossible control, and the relief that followed was so sharp it was almost painful, like breathing after near drowning. Her chest heaved, sweat rolling down her temple, and she whispered hoarsely into the stillness, "You are alive, you are real, and so am I." The light on the panel dimmed, flickered, and then steadied green again as if the craft itself had been tested and found ready, and in that fragile reconciliation between fear and triumph, Ilara realized she had crossed the threshold. This was no longer an experiment but a new era born in her hands, and though danger remained, she would ride it until the world itself was forced to follow, far below. While Ilara guided her craft in daring arcs across the sky, the men in the hangar had gone from laughter to shock to a restless unease that bordered on panic, because the longer she stayed aloft, the harder it became to dismiss her achievement as a fluke or a lucky stunt, and murmurs rose among them that spread like wildfire through the base. One mechanic was already fumbling with his phone, dialing a superior, stammering into the receiver about what he was witnessing, while another sprinted toward the control tower to alert flight command, his boots echoing like gunfire on the tarmac, and still others stood rooted in place, their pride too heavy to allow them to move but their eyes wide with the realization that history was unfolding without them. Ilara couldn't hear their frantic calls from her altitude, but she could imagine them, the words unauthorized, experimental, dangerous, tumbling into headsets, triggering the attention of officials who had long ago rejected her proposals, and the thought made her lips tighten into a grim line because she knew that if they tried to ground her now, it would not be out of concern for safety but out of fear of what her success represented. The world was not ready, she thought, or perhaps it was more accurate to say the gatekeepers of the old order were not ready, because readiness had never been about technology or possibility, it had always been about control and silence. Her silence was control slipping through their hands. She banked sharply, testing responsiveness one more time, the wings slicing sunlight into dazzling shards, and even as she reveled in the harmony of flight, she caught sight of movement on the ground, emergency vehicles racing onto the runway, sirens wailing though they sounded faint and insignificant compared to the vast hush of her cockpit, and she understood that her window of freedom was closing fast. Yet instead of dread, she felt defiance burn through her veins, because for years they had told her she could not, should not, must not, and now that she had proven otherwise, they sought to cage her again, but she would not descend meekly into their nets. She angled the nose upward, climbing higher, the earth curving beneath her, and the very act of ascent felt like rebellion carved across the sky. A voice crackled faintly in her headset at last, authority laced with irritation, ordering her to return immediately, citing protocol, permits, airspace violations, but she only exhaled slowly, savoring the irony that they wanted to bind silence with noise, and chose not to respond, letting their words fade into static while her aircraft cut through the heavens without a whisper. Her mind flickered back to the sleepless nights when she had begged for funding, begged for recognition, begged for the chance to prove herself, and how every door had been slammed, every plea met with laughter, until she stopped begging and built it anyway, and now here she was, not asking permission, not offering explanation, simply existing in the sky with undeniable proof. She rolled the craft gently, inverting for a breathless moment, the world upside down beneath her, and when she leveled again she saw not just the coastline but the city beyond it, unaware yet that history had shifted, that one young woman had broken through walls meant to keep her grounded. The sirens below grew more frantic, their lights flashing like impotent beacons, and she wondered how many of those men wished now that they had stood with her instead of against her, that they had believed instead of laughed, but it no longer mattered, because belief was irrelevant when reality blazed overhead in silver silence. She traced a long arc across the sky, looping back toward the base, not because she intended to land but because she wanted them to see her, all of them, to feel the weight of their disbelief turn to awe, to know that every jeer had been fuel for this moment. The comms erupted again, multiple voices now, escalating in urgency, some threatening, some pleading, and she thought briefly of responding, thought of telling them the truth, that she did not fly today despite them, but because she had always been meant to, but she let the silence answer for her because silence was stronger than any word she could offer. The red light on her panel flickered once more, a reminder of the limits she was pressing, but she pressed onward anyway, tracing patterns across the heavens, knowing that even if they forced her down, even if they confiscated the machine, even if they tried to bury her work, they could never erase the sight of what she had already done, nor the recordings spreading from every phone camera below. For the first time she thought not just of proving herself but of the generations to come, of girls who might see this flight one day and know that laughter was only noise, that silence could be power, that they too could defy physics, authority, expectation. And with that realization, the loneliness she had carried all these years cracked, and she felt a surge of connection, invisible but fierce, to every unseen dreamer watching from afar, and it strengthened her resolve to keep flying, no matter the sirens, no matter the commands barking through static, no matter the fear in the eyes that once mocked her, because the sky was hers now, and she intended to hold it. Ilara steadied her hands on the controls as the comms filled with sharper voices, the clipped tones of men unaccustomed to being ignored, and beneath their commands she could hear the agitation of something larger stirring, the bureaucratic machine that had once dismissed her now jolting awake in alarm, and she knew what would come next even before the words were spoken: interception. The thought might have chilled another pilot, but for her it only sparked a steely calm, because she had anticipated this long ago, sketching it in her mind while soldering wires in the silence of her workshop, imagining the moment they would try to cage her dream with brute force, and in those imaginings she had always decided the same thing: she would not yield. Sure enough, minutes later, a distant roar broke against the silence, faint at first but growing louder, the unmistakable thunder of a conventional jet engine ripping through the sky behind her, and when she tilted her craft slightly to glance over her shoulder, she saw it, a dark arrow-shaped silhouette rising from the horizon, flames spitting from its tail as it surged toward her with a violence her machine had rendered obsolete. The irony was bitter and beautiful. They had built their whole world on the roar of power, and now they chased silence with noise. Ilara inhaled deeply, adjusted her altitude, and let her aircraft glide smoother, her movements unhurried as though mocking their desperation, while the fighter closed the distance, its speed furious but clumsy compared to her effortless slipstream. A voice came through again, this one colder, official, demanding her immediate descent, warning that she was entering restricted airspace, threatening consequences if she did not comply, but she only smiled faintly, a curve of lips that carried both defiance and sorrow, because she had never set out to be a criminal or a rebel, only a dreamer who refused to be told no, and yet here she was, treated like an enemy for daring to succeed. The pursuing jet drew closer, its engine screaming, and Ilara could almost feel the tremor of its rage rattling the air, but her own craft remained steady, untouched by sound, a blade of stillness cutting through chaos. She adjusted her course toward the open ocean, knowing that if confrontation came it would be better away from the city, away from innocents who had no part in this struggle, and the fighter followed, its shadow looming larger across the waves. Below. The comms grew harsher, threats sharper, but she tuned them out, focusing instead on the way her machine responded to every delicate input, The way silence wrapped around her like an ally, and she realized with a jolt of pride that they could not catch her. Not truly, because their engines betrayed them, dragging against the air, while hers flowed within it, almost invisible, almost untouchable. Still, she understood the danger. If they could not force her down, they might decide to destroy her, and though the idea should have filled her with terror, it only deepened her resolve, because to end her would not erase what she had done, it would only prove how afraid they were of change. She banked hard, pulling into a climb that made the fighter overshoot beneath her, its thunder booming uselessly in her wake, and for a moment she laughed aloud, the sound swallowed instantly by the cockpit, but alive in her chest. She looped smoothly, rolling over the jet's path, her silent craft a phantom dancing above its furious roar, and she imagined the pilot inside, cursing, bewildered, perhaps even awed, because this was not how pursuit was supposed to go. Another voice cut through the comms, this one more measured, a negotiator perhaps, urging her to think rationally, promising discussions if only she would land, but Alara knew promises were shackles, words designed to slow revolutions until they could be strangled, and she refused to play their game. Instead she pressed her throttle, coaxing more speed, her machine humming with energy as it sliced further out to sea, leaving the jet straining behind, its engines roaring louder as though trying to shout her down, but the sky was on her side, vast and infinite, and silence was faster than sound. She thought briefly of her future, of what would happen when she eventually landed, confiscation, interrogation, maybe worse, but she forced the thoughts aside because the present was too vivid, too alive to be wasted on fear. She angled upward again, piercing another thin cloud bank, and for an instant she was invisible, the fighter losing her trail until she burst free above it, sunlight blazing across her silver wings, and she felt untouchable, as if she had already escaped their world and entered one of her own making. Down below, the comms crackled with frustration, voices overlapping, threats mixing with confusion, but she let it all fade because the truth was undeniable. They could chase her, they could threaten her, they could even fire upon her, but they could not catch silence, and silence was hers. The fighter had fallen behind for the moment, but Alara knew it was only a pause, a recalibration, because men who held power did not surrender easily, and already she imagined the conversations happening on secure channels, the frantic debates between officers and officials who could not decide if she was a criminal to be punished or a discovery to be claimed, and she understood that indecision would not last long because systems built on control always resorted to force when persuasion failed. The comms went quiet for a brief, tense stretch, the silence almost mocking in her ears compared to the serenity that wrapped her cockpit, and then a new voice arrived, deeper, colder, a commander who wasted no time with pretense, announcing flatly that she was now considered a hostile aircraft operating illegally, and that non-compliance would be treated as aggression. Her stomach tightened, not with fear but with a heavy sadness, because she had always believed that proof of beauty, of possibility, would inspire wonder, not threats, yet here she was, soaring above the ocean with the machine of her dreams, and instead of celebration the world answered her with crosshairs. She thought of landing, just for a fleeting moment, of surrendering the craft intact so they would have to acknowledge its reality, but the thought soured instantly because she knew surrender would mean erasure, her name stripped, her work absorbed into the faceless machine of authority, her silence twisted into another roar they could control. Better to risk destruction in flight than to let her creation be caged, she told herself, gripping the stick tighter, her jaw clenched as she watched the fighter reposition below her, its engines clawing for altitude, its wings glinting with the faint menace of weapon mounts. The commander's voice cut through again, issuing a final warning, and she could almost feel the collective breath of those watching on the ground, the men who had laughed now transfixed, perhaps praying in secret that she would not fall, though their prayers were not for her but for the chance to say later that they had seen her die. She banked sharply, tilting the craft into a wide arc, testing its agility once more, and though the frame shivered faintly under the strain, it held, its silence steady as though the machine itself refused to bow. A memory rushed to her unbidden, the night she first tested the power coils in her garage, how the neighbors had banged on the walls, shouting about noise when there had been none, accusing her of breaking rules she hadn't broken, and she realized then what she realized again now, that people feared not what they heard but what they could not. She was invisible in a way no roar could ever be, a ghost that shattered their definitions of flight, and so they reached for weapons because they could not reach her. The fighter closed again, this time slower, more deliberate, flying just off her wing, and for the first time she saw the pilot's visor turn toward her, a faceless reflection staring into her cockpit, and though no words passed between them, she felt a connection, a human pulse in the steel storm around her, and she wondered if he, too, felt the absurdity of this dance, If some part of him wished he could abandon his orders and join her instead of hunting her. The thought lasted only an instant before the comms crackled, new words arriving not from the fighter but from a command center she could not see, coldly instructing authorization of measures as necessary. Her chest tightened, her breath shallower because those words were not vague to a pilot. They meant missiles, meant death wrapped in a steel casing, meant the end of her sky. She adjusted altitude again, climbing sharply, and the fighter followed, slower, its roar chasing her like an animal snarling at a shadow, and she thought bitterly that they would rather destroy what they did not understand than admit they were wrong. She whispered into the silence of her cockpit, "If this is the end, let it be mine, not theirs," and pressed the throttle, her craft leaping higher, cutting into thinner air where the engines of the fighter would begin to strain. The gauges flashed warnings, heat lines edging higher, the strain audible now in the faintest creaks of the frame, but she did not relent because if they wanted to end her, they would have to do it here at the edge of the sky, where silence could not be denied. She rolled suddenly, dropping altitude in a swoop that forced the fighter to overshoot, and for a few glorious seconds she was free of its shadow, gliding in perfect stillness as the ocean wheeled beneath her, silver light painting her canopy, and she felt alive in a way no threat could take. Yet she knew it could not last, that another order was already being barked through radios, another calculation being made, and so she steadied herself, ready for whatever storm they would hurl next, determined that if silence had to fight, it would fight with grace, not fear. Zara Court ku file ku bad apni kursi par by tt, somni media ku cameras of bichamak rahi the, lekin is dafa unki rashni main uski chair par fakr or sekunda. Usan apni puri zindagi ki kahani ek pal main yad kar li. Wo din jab use outdated cage car battlefield esi nikauni ki koshish ki gaiti. Wo raten jabus an apni bidi hui dostun ki yad main ansu bahayi the, or wo din be jabus an apni aapse wada kia the ku ek din sabko sabik karka daikayaji ku ek soldier kabi retire nahi hoda, chahi log uski uniform chin line ya kursi kinch line. Judge ka faisla surfek jeet nahi the, ya uski liya is it or insaf ka certificate the. Lekin asli ladai abi baki ti, kyunki abuse surf kortrum hai nahi, samaj ki sak ko bi badalna the. Jab wo court building se bahar nikli, uska saman media or supporters any gaira huada. Ek young ladki jiska shayad ubi training chow raha the beat ko push karka yi or uski taraf dek q bola. Mam, aap mary hero ho. Jab unhome kaha ku aap outdated ho, main sosha the ku agar aap outdated hain tohum sab kakia hoga? Lekin aj apn humian daikaya ku asli soldier kabi outdated nahi hoda. Zara enias ladki kukanda par hathra ka or muskurakar kaha. Beta kabi jishi ki batan main mat ana. Uniform tum shan dedi hai, lekin asal shan tumhari himat or sakhai hai. Uniform kabi purani nahi hodi, bs penanuala uski ruban ada hai. Asladki ki ankan chamak uthi, jays uski dil main nei rashni bar gai ho. Media kusawal ek kubadak bars rahi the, Zara, ab aap kia karenji? Kia AAP military system main wapas JNG? AAP unlagan ko kia kana chahenji jinhon apko outdated kahada? Zara thodi der kulia kamashrahi, farasan sarathakar camera ki taraf deka or khdia? Main apnafars battlefield main nibhaya the or AJ court main nibhaya. Main apni mission se kabi piche nahi hadi. Jo mui outdated Kate Hain, uns main biasit na kana chahanji, kl ka battlefield par main t, AJ ki court main hoon? Or KL Kalia main apni kam ki bedian ko tayar kar rahi hoon. Agar ya outdated hona hai, to main fakresi outdated hoon. Uski alphas any puri beat ko ek dam esi talian bajain par majbur kar dia. Social media par uski speeches viral hon lagi, uska case ek national symbol ban gaya. Army ko andar be ek debateth gai, kia age or experience ko outdated samajna sahi hai? Kai young officers any be openly uska support karna shuru kar dia. Zara any decide kia kuwo surf yahan rakegi nahi. Usnek Foundation B'nai Jaim retired soldiers, Kosker women veterans, KO platform Milta Jahan wo apni experiences share kardi or ne recruits KO guide kardi. Dear Uska network Barda Gaya or Ek Andolan ki Shakal Lena Laga. Military ku andar jo bureaucrats usi rakna chatte, unhon deka kuab wo ek individual nahi, ek movement ban chuki ti. Fur ek din, ek high-level military seminar hua jaim usi speaker kutor par balaya gaya. Ironically wahi log jo use outdated kh kar dismiss karna chatte, ab uski speech ko sun kuliya sami by the. Zara any stage par jade hayek bar hall ko deka or kaha, Jab main apna pala mission complete kia the tab mui medal dia gaya. Jab main apna akri mission kia mui retirement letter dia gaya. Or jab main apni liya insaf manga, mui outdated kh kar court beja gaya. Lekin aj main yahan hoon, apni bujurg soldiers kalia apni young cadets kalia, or apni mulk kalia ken kalia, soldier kabi outdated nahi hoda. Hamari training kadam ho sakti hai, hamari postings kadam ho sakti hain, lekin hamari ru or hamara fars kabi kadam nahi hoda. Us hal main asi kamoshi, jays sapki dil uski alphas kaomesus kar rahi ho. Or jabus and speech kadam ki, pura hal talian se gunjatha. Wahi generals jo kabi uski against the abkata hoker usi salute kar rahi the. Zara kucher par muskan aa gai, asan apni ankan ban karka dil hai dil main apni dostun, apni guzar hu comrades, or apni kurbanian ko yad kia. Asan sosha, ya surf mary jeet nahi hai, ya unsapki jeet hai jeen hon sacrifice dia or unsapki bi jo kabi outdated nahi hung. Oras din asi zara surfek veteran nahi rahi, woek misal ban gai, ek nam jo agal nazlan ko yad dalata rahiga kahak or izak ki ladai kabi purani nahi hodi. Subaka wak the hawa thandi chow rahi ti, lekin poor neighborhood main ek ajib si kamoshi ti. Sablog jandi the aj ka din fazle ka din hai. Court ka final decision ain wala the jahan hoa Karen any marina or uski parivar kukalaf apna akri card kelatha. Karen any judge ko convince karn ki koshish ki ti ku marina ka property lake access ku kabel hai nahi, lekin marina ku lawyer any sabut ka pahar jama kar dia the. Documents, photographs or witness statements any sab kuch saf kar dia the. Log secretly marina ku saf kata the kyunki sab Karen ki dictatorship se tang aa chuk the. Karen ko lagta the kua jb wajitaji, lekin asal main uski shikas te ti. Court hall ku bahar log jama the kuch kafzada kuch excited. Judge any jab apna decision sunaya to hoyan main bsek hai bot gunji, Karen or uski hoa board ki sari powers cancel kar di gai. Hoa dissolve kar dia gaya, or marina ka lake access permanently protect ho gaya. Karen ka chera safe pad gaya, jays uski sap nyahin tut gay ho. Marina any andar si Gary sans lias and judge ka shakriya ada kia or lagan ki taraf deka jo abuski taraf muskara rahitha. Pali dafa neighborhood any ek in saf deka the jahan ek in sin kia was any pura system hila dia. Karen any gus main apni papers feek chilei, lekin koi uski batan ko sunwala nahitha. Judge any usi seeth kaha ku agar wa future main or koi juthi complaint karegi to uski kalaf criminal charges lejenj. Karen any apni kursi asi of hu marina ki taraf deka or bsek line boli, yiladai ubi kadam nahi hui. Lekin sab jandi the, uska dor kadam ho chuka the. Jab marina gar lot rahi ti, usandeka kupor neighborhood kulag uska and teaser kar rahi the. Bakshe claps kar rahi the bujurg log uski hath mila rahi the, or kuch oratain aro rahi ti kyunki unhi isalaga ku unki bi zindagi aj azad ho gai. Marina ki ankan main ansu aa gay, lekin yi ansu kushi kutha. Uski husband any usi gale lagaya or kaha, tum kar dai kaya, tum nun sapko hara dia jo samaj the ku ek insan kuch nahi kar sakta. Marina any muskurakar jawab dia, hum sab milker kar sakt hain bs himat chahi. Agal dino main neighborhood main sab badal gaya. Jo Paani or Lake Pelly surf Karen or Uski HOA group Kalia reserved the Upsapki Liya open the families picnic Manain Lagi, Bakshe Lake Kukin or Keln Lage, or Wahan Dobara life Wapazain Lagi. Karen any Koshish ki apna ek naya group Banain ki, lekin koi uska soth din ko tayar nahitha. Uski arrogance or zid any use akela kar dia. Dear wa neighborhood main ek warning sign ban gai, log use decker samaj ku power ka misuse akir main kis terra shikas dita hai. Ek din marina lake kukinar by tt. Suraj dao rahadha or paani ku upper golden reflections kale rahitha. Uski pas uska beta aya or bola. Mama, agar aap lati nahi da hum kabi lake main kud ko free feel nahi kar pate. Marina any use apni god main bithaya or kaha. Beta hamesha yad rakna. Jo sahi ho uski liya ladna mushkil zero or hoda hai. Lekin akir main sahi hamesha jita hai. Us pal marina any messes kia ku uski ladai surf lake access kuliya nahi ti, baki and saf hak or isik kuliya ti. Neighborhood kulagan any decide kia ku lake kupasek chodi si memory bench baniyanj, jimek plak parlika haga. Yahan and saf any jit hazel ki, dar or zid ku kalaf ekawaz bani, or pura samaj azad hua. Marina ko yi idea pazandaya. Usan realize kia ka kabi kabi ek choti asai ladai ka asar generation tak reda hai. Karen ab kabi kabi apnigar se lake ko dekti t, lekin ab ek outsider t. Uski pas power t, lekin usan misuse kia or ab kuch nahi bacha. Marina eni apni dil main uski liya koi nafrat nahi raki, ba ek lesson raka, ka arrogance or control ka and hamesha shikast hai hoda hai. Story ko en main neighborhood ek nahi kahani lik raha de, ek kahani azadi ki, ek kahani ek or ki jo sab kaliya kadi hui or jinhon ek dictator ko hamesha kaliya shankar dia. Marina lake ki taraf dek hu muskarei or dirasi kaha, yijit meri nahi hum sab ki hai. The end.